Today's story is tender enough to break your heart, yet fierce enough to make you believe again, unfolding across the harsh beauty of the old American frontier. This is a land shaped by storms, scars, and the quiet collisions of fate. And it all starts with one simple act, an object left behind, carrying a promise that refuses to die. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The August sun bore down on Bitter Mesa like a weight meant to break a man's will. Heat rippled above the dirt road leading toward the Hale farm, and the cottonwoods along the creek sagged in exhausted silence, their leaves dulled to silver by layers of dust. It was the kind of day that pulled sweat from the body without mercy, the kind that punished stillness. Yet Ash had been moving since first light. Out along the boundary line, he drove a cedar post into soil so hard it rang beneath the iron head of the maul. His shirt clung darkly to his shoulders, stretched across muscle shaped by years of labor. There was a dangerous ease to the way he worked, like something once wild, now restrained only by choice. His hands were rough, split by weeks of work, but steady, unshaking. Each strike sent dust bursting upward before it settled again, marking time in a world that felt trapped beneath the sun. From the porch, Clara watched him. She had stepped outside with a dipper of cool well water, but she paused, drawn into the measured rhythm of his movements. Ash never wasted effort. He never had. Whether it was splitting wood, mending fence rails, or lifting Walter Hale gently from his chair and carrying him to bed, his actions were always deliberate, purposeful. To Clara, there was something unsettling in that quiet certainty. It was as if labor itself was his language, the only one he trusted. A man who spoke through service because he had no words for what was growing inside his chest. She crossed the yard, dry grass crunching beneath her boots. "Here," she said, extending the dipper. "You'll cook yourself out here." Ash stopped. He straightened slowly, rolling tension from his back, and took the water. His fingers brushed hers, brief, charged, his scarred hand swallowing hers whole. He drank without haste, letting the coolness ease his throat, his dark eyes lifting to meet hers over the rim. The silence between them pressed heavier than the cicadas, thick with everything neither dared say. He handed the dipper back. "The fence doesn't care about the heat," he said quietly. "It just asks to stand." Clara smiled faintly, her chest tightening with a feeling she barely allowed herself to recognize. "Well," she murmured, "you've been standing in for half our work these past months." She hesitated, then added, "Papa says he doesn't know whether to thank you or feel ashamed." Ash said nothing. He rarely did when words weren't required. He turned back to the post, focus settling over him like a cloak, and raised the maul once more. Ash turned back to the post without another word. His focus narrowed, settling over him the way it always did, complete, impenetrable, like a cloak pulled tight against the world. But Clara did not leave. They worked through the long afternoon together. Ash drove the posts deep into the earth, one by one, while Clara followed with a bucket of nails and a hammer, always ready before he asked. Their movements fell into an unspoken pattern. Pack the soil, drive the nail. The rhythm carried them, quiet, steady, full. By sundown, the fence line stood straight and true. The rails lay stacked cleanly beside it. They paused there, shoulder to shoulder, as the first evening breeze lifted the hem of Clara's dress. For a brief, fragile moment, it felt as though they had carved out a piece of the world that might endure. But Bitter Mesa had never been kind to such hopes. When Clara finally spoke, her words cut cleanly through the cooling air. "The bluecoat troopers passed through town this morning." Ash went rigid. He did not turn. "How many?" he asked. "8, she answered, "headed north. Folks say the fort is calling all the bands in again." There was talk of fighting. There was always talk. But Ash had lived between two worlds long enough to know how quickly words became commands, and commands became blood. He stared towards the horizon, where purple shadows swallowed the sagebrush. His father rested beneath a white man's cross in a churchyard far from here. His mother's people lived inside his ribs. Tonight, both pulled at him like rawhide ropes drawn tight. Without speaking, he gathered his tools and carried them to the lean-to. Clara followed, dread knotting low in her stomach. That night, after the chores were finished and Walter Hale and Mary Hale had drifted into uneasy sleep, she walked with Ash down to the creek. Moonlight spilled across the shallow water, turning it to silver. Cottonwoods whispered overhead, as if the dark itself were listening. Ash stopped beneath the trees, his face carved in shadow. He reached inside his shirt, close to his heart, and drew out a small bundle. When he placed it in her palm, she caught her breath. A comb, no longer than her hand. Pale green jade, worn smooth by years of touch. Its curved back echoed the shape of a crescent moon, glowing faintly even in the dim light. The stone seemed to hold its own quiet fire. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered. "It was my mother's," Ash said. His voice was rough, tightly held. "She gave it to me before she died, told me to keep it until I met the woman I could never forget." He looked toward the water rushing over stone. "I've met her." Clara's fingers closed around the cool jade, her hand trembling. "Why give it to me now?" "Because I can't carry it where I'm going," he said. "They're gathering my people in the high country. Some will go to the agency, some will fight." "And you?" she asked, her heart jolting. "For how long?" "I don't know. A season. Maybe more." He swallowed. "Maybe I don't come back." His jaw tightened, moonlight sharpening the line of his cheek. "That's why I can't ask you to wait," he said quietly. "You deserve peace, Clara, not a shadow limping home." Tears filled her eyes as she stood there, the weight of the jade heavy in her palm. Her voice did not waver. It was rooted in the same hard ground she worked every day. "You think love is peace," Clara said quietly. "It isn't. Love is labor, and I already know where mine stands." Ash shook his head sharply. "Don't build your life around me," he said. "Promise me that." She did not answer him. Instead, she lifted the jade comb and slid it into her hair, tucking it just above her ear. Even in the dark, it caught the light, green and steady, like a drop of water holding fast. "Then I'll keep this," she whispered. "Not because you asked, but because it's ours." Ash studied her for a long moment, committing the shape of her face to memory, the stubborn lift of her chin that had always undone him. Slowly, he raised his hand and rested his forehead against hers, the way Naya's people offered both blessing and farewell in a single breath. "I ride before midnight," he murmured. "Then ride," Clara said, tears finally breaking free. "But if there's breath left in you, Shadow, come back." He stepped away before his resolve failed him. By the time he mounted his horse, the moon had climbed higher, cold and bright. He rode without turning until the house vanished behind the rise of land. Still, he carried the image with him, the green glint of jade in her hair. Small, unyielding, like hope that refused to die. The autumn of 1875 brought Ash no harvest, only smoke and gunfire, the harsh yield of a life he had known since boyhood. The vast stone cathedrals of the high country became killing ground. From the ridges, he watched the bluecoat troopers move like shadows across the sage, rifle barrels flashing beneath a sun that gave no warmth. His people scattered like leaves before a hard wind, regrouping in canyons, striking back in desperation, then scattering again. There was no refuge, not for women crouched deep in ravines, trying to quiet crying children, not for elders bent beneath packs they could no longer carry. Ash moved with them, a ghost on his own land. The pull of the churchyard and the pull of the canyon, the two worlds that once warred inside him, were drowned out by the brutal demand of survival. He lived only for what came next, the next breath, the next ridge, the next scrap of cover. One night, beneath a sky torn apart by cold stars, Ash crouched in a ravine beside Toma. The air reeked of spent powder and the sour sweat of exhausted horses. "We can't hold them," Toma muttered, his voice thin with fatigue. "We hold as long as we have to," Ash answered. Even as he spoke, the truth hollowed his chest. They were standing against a tide that would not turn. At dawn, the soldiers pressed hard. Bullets hissed off stone, tearing sprays of lethal dust into the air. Ash fired until the rifle barrel burned his palm, his world narrowing to a single, merciless task. Then the crack came. Sharp. Final. The impact struck him like a hammer, spinning him sideways. Heat tore through his body. A white-hot pain, like a branding iron, drove through his left leg. The world tipped. Ash stumbled, collapsing behind a slab of sandstone. His teeth clenched tight, choking back a cry that clawed at his throat. He looked down and saw the blood. Bright, shocking, darkening the dust beneath him. His blood, spilling into the land he had tried to protect. When the skirmish finally broke and the bluecoat troopers pulled back, he was carried away half-conscious, the world flickering between smoke and silence. He lived, but he lived broken. The muscle in his leg had been torn past simple repair. It healed, but it healed wrong. In the months that followed, as the band pushed south to outrun winter, Ash bound the limb with rawhide and leaned on a staff carved from mesquite. He forced himself forward. Each step dragged the dead weight behind him, and the weight stayed. It became part of him, a constant, an unrelenting reminder of failure. At night he woke from dreams filled with shouting men and the copper stench of blood, jerking upright, heart hammering, until the desert sky faded from black to gray. He told no one. Shame settled into him like a parasite. He saw his reflection in water troughs, a warrior who could no longer run, a protector barely able to guard himself. He was 27 years old, and in his own eyes, already only half a man. He thought of the farm, of the fence line he had set, straight and true. But when he closed his eyes and saw Clara's face, sickness rolled through him. What could he give her now? A cripple? A burden? A man who woke screaming in the dark? In the cold silence of the high desert, he made his choice. It was better she believe him dead. To return like this would be the cruelest thing of all. Back on Bitter Mesa, the seasons turned with slow, grinding indifference. Clara held the Hale farm together with hands roughened by lye soap and the washboard. She rose before first light to haul water, tend the chickens, and mend clothes worn thin as paper. Summer's heat gave way to the bite of autumn wind. With the cold came the worsening of Walter Hale's illness. His cough rattled through the thin walls at night, keeping Clara awake, staring at the ceiling, praying for dawn. Mary Hale's eyes dimmed. Her steps slowed week by week. Clara carried it all, the plowing, the harvest, the nursing. And when her body finally cried for rest, when her shoulders ached so deeply she thought she might fold, she reached into her pocket. Her fingers closed around the cool, smooth curve of the jade comb. She kept it with her always. Sometimes, when no one was watching, she slipped it into her hair, feeling its weight there, solid, steady, an anchor. At other times, it stayed wrapped in a scrap of cloth, pressed flat against her chest like a hidden pulse. To Clara, it was more than a piece of stone. It was Ash's voice in the dark. It was his promise, never spoken, never broken. But the town carried a different story. At church gatherings, the older women would pat her hand with practiced gentleness, their eyes filled with a pity that cut deeper than cruelty. "You can't live on memories, Clara," they would murmur. "He was Apache. You've heard the stories?" "He's probably gone." The men were harsher. At the general store, their voices dropped low, but not low enough. "Ash is dead. Or worse," they muttered. "Best not to speak his name." Clara heard every word. She carried her water buckets. She baked her bread. And she held her silence. Brick by brick, she built a fortress around her heart. It was Luke Bennett who finally tried to break through it. Luke was a good man. Tall, young, a rancher with sandy hair and a steady, decent way about him. He had always treated Clara kindly, never once mocking Ash's work at the farm in the years before the war. He saw her struggle, saw the weariness etched too deeply into a face still young. One afternoon, while Clara was hanging laundry in a hard, whipping wind, Luke rode up. He swung down from his horse, hat in hand, dust curling around his boots. "Clara," he said, his voice careful, earnest. "I've been thinking." She paused, a wet sheet snapping between them like a truce flag, and looked at him. "You've carried too much since your pa fell sick," Luke went on. "No woman should shoulder that alone." He stepped closer. "I could help. I'd see to your folks. Make sure you never lacked for meat or firewood. I'd be proud to." He hesitated, then said it. "If you'd be my wife." The words hung between them, heavy and sweet. Safety. Rest. A life without constant worry over whether the roof would hold or the well would run dry. Clara's fingers tightened in the damp linen. She liked Luke. She respected him. But his offer felt like a shroud being drawn over a living heart. "You're kind, Luke," she said quietly. "But I can't." He studied her, brow creasing. "Is it because of him?" he asked gently. "People say he's gone. You know that as well as I do." Clara's throat closed tight. For a brief moment, doubt tried to slip in, born of 3 long years of silence, of rumors, of the world's hard logic. Then Clara remembered the weight of Ash's forehead resting against hers by the creek. She felt the phantom press of the jade comb against her scalp, as real as if it were still there. She lifted her chin. Her eyes were clear, unyielding. "I know what I know," she said. That was all. Luke Bennett studied her for a long moment. He saw the firmness in her jaw, the steady fire in her gaze. At last, he gave a small, resigned nod. "If you ever change your mind," he said quietly, "I'll be here." He swung back into the saddle and rode away, dust rising behind him. When he was gone, Clara sagged against the clothesline, strength draining from her legs. Tears blurred the wide, empty sky. "Lord," she whispered into the wind. Her hand slipped into her pocket, closing once more around the jade comb. "Give me the strength to keep believing." By the spring of 1878, the war had burned itself down to cold ash. The great bands were fenced in by government orders and barbed wire. Those who still resisted drifted south into the high deserts of Mexico, or vanished into the deepest canyons, becoming ghosts of a broken nation. Ash was one of the ones who slipped away. He did not return in triumph. He came on foot. His leg had never healed true. The bone had knitted crooked, the muscle wasted, leaving him with a dragging, uneven gait. Every step was a battle. Every mile, a bargain struck with pain. He leaned hard on a mesquite staff, carrying little beyond a frayed blanket roll and a hunting knife. When he reached the outskirts of Bitter Mesa, he did not take the main road. He did not knock on doors that had once welcomed him. Instead, he circled wide through scrub and arroyos, moving like a coyote that knows it does not belong. He found a half-collapsed cabin at the edge of the timber line, where pine met red rock. He cleared a fire pit and made camp there. With every agonizing mile behind him, he had thought of Clara, of her laugh beside creeks, her stubborn eyes in canyon light, the way the jade comb had gleamed in her hair beneath the moon. But standing now in the shadows of the trees, looking down toward the Hale farm, the thought of facing her turned his stomach. He imagined her seeing him bent over a stick like an old man, his leg dragging useless behind him. What could he offer her now? He was a vessel packed with scars and nightmares. Better, he told himself, that she believe him gone. So he stayed a shadow. At dusk, he trapped rabbits and traded pelts for flour through Caleb Forge, the blacksmith, a man who asked no questions, who passed supplies across the counter with a nod weighted by quiet understanding. When the Bitter Mesa folk caught sight of him limping along the timber's edge, they turned their faces away, pretending they had seen nothing at all. Bitter Mesa had never made room for Ash, and now it seemed satisfied to erase him completely. But Clara had not erased him. She still carried the weight of the farm alone. Walter Hale's cough had deepened into a harsh rattle that shook the house at night. Mary Hale's hands trembled so badly she could scarcely shell beans without spilling them. And in the quiet hours, when the house finally settled into uneasy sleep, Clara lay awake, her fingers wrapped tight around the cool, smooth curve of the jade comb. 3 years had passed since Ash rode into the dark, yet she felt him still, like a pulse buried beneath the earth. Then, one evening in town, the truth split open. Clara was standing near the counter, buying salt and kerosene, when she overheard 2 men murmuring by the stove. "I swear I saw him up by the timber," one said. "Tall fellow, looked Apache." "Limped bad," the other added. "Ash!" The second man snorted. "He's dead. Dead as dust. You saw a ghost." "Maybe," the first shrugged, "but this ghost was buying flour." Clara's heart slammed into her throat. She said nothing. She paid for her goods. She went home, and she waited, until the chores were finished, and the moon rose thin and sharp, like a sickle blade in the sky. Then she lit the lantern, and took the narrow path toward the timber line. The night smelled of pine sap and damp soil. Her pulse hammered harder with every step, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Near midnight, she found the cabin, crouched beneath leaning pines like a wounded animal. A faint ribbon of smoke slipped from the chimney. She stopped, breath catching in the cold air. She wasn't afraid of the man inside. She was afraid of what time might have done to him. Clara stepped forward and knocked. Silence answered. Then came the heavy, uneven scrape of wood against wood, the sound of a staff dragging across the floor. The door cracked open. Ash stood there. Firelight flickered behind him, cutting his face into sharp planes of shadow and flame. He looked thinner, harder, as if carved from stone and sorrow. But his eyes, dark, fierce, were the same. They stared at each other across the threshold of 3 stolen years. "Ash," she whispered. He gripped the doorframe, knuckles whitening, as though bracing himself against the sound of her voice. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "You're alive," Clara said, tears burning her eyes. "You came back." "I told you not to wait," he replied, his voice flat, stripped of warmth. "Dry as the land in a drought," Clara said. "I didn't wait." She stepped closer, refusing to shrink from his coldness. "I worked, I cared for my family, I lived, but I never stopped hoping." Ash's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping hard along his cheek. "Hope is a cruel thing, Clara," he said. "Look at me." He shifted his weight, stepping back just enough to expose the truth, the heavy drag of his left leg. He leaned hard on the staff, gripping it as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "What do you see?" he demanded, bitterness slicing into his voice. "Do you see a warrior? A husband?" "I see you," she shot back. "No," he cut in sharply. "You see what's broken, a man half ruined, not the one you knew." "I see the man who gave me this." Clara reached into her pocket and drew out the jade comb. It caught the lamplight, glowing green and steady in the dark. "Every day," she said, "through every storm I kept it. You gave it because you couldn't ask me to wait. I kept it because I chose to." Something cracked in Ash's face, a flash of raw, exposed longing that nearly buckled his knees. His eyes fell to the comb, then lifted to her face. The pain there was unbearable. Then he forced it down. The walls slammed back into place. "Clara, don't," he whispered. "You'll waste your life on me. I can't give you a future. Not now. Not ever." "Then why did you come back at all?" she cried, her voice breaking. Ash looked past her, out toward the dark stretch of mesa. His shoulders sagged, defeated. "I don't know," he said softly. "Habit, ghosts. Maybe I thought I could stand to see the land again." He swallowed. "But not you. You deserve more than what's left of me." Silence fell between them, heavy as the unseen lines drawn through the night. At last, he stepped back and opened the door wider, not to invite her in, but to clear the way out. "Go home, Clara," he said, his voice shaking. "Mercy is leaving me alone." Her breath caught like glass, shattering in her chest. She searched his face for the man who had once rested his forehead against hers by the creek, but found only a wall of shame she could not climb. Not tonight. Slowly, she slipped the comb back into her pocket. "If that's what you want," she said, her voice trembling, "then I'll go." She paused, eyes burning. "But don't think a limp makes you less, Ash. The only thing that does is pushing love away." She turned and walked back into the night, the lantern swinging at her side, its light wobbling with each uncertain step along the rocky path. Behind her, Ash watched until the glow vanished into the trees. Then he shut the door. He pressed his forehead against the rough timber, eyes burning. Inside the cabin, the silence swallowed everything, the sound of her footsteps fading, leaving only wind moving through the pines. There, in the dark, the man who had faced gunfire without flinching finally broke. He wept for the years already lost, for the leg that would never truly carry him again, and for the woman he loved enough to shatter his own heart to protect. The storm came down from the north the way storms always did on the high mesa, sudden and savage. One moment the sky was bruised purple. The next, black clouds poured over the ridge like spilled ink. Wind tore at the dust, whipping it into a blinding fury. Thunder growled deep in the canyon, sounding less like weather and more like something alive and enraged. Down at the farm, Clara felt the shift before she saw it. She was in the yard taking in the laundry when the light vanished so fast the white sheets snapped in the wind like ghost flags. She gathered them quickly, hands moving on instinct, though her heart had not been in the work for weeks. For 3 long weeks she had carried the crushing weight of Ash's rejection. She had done her chores, cared for her parents, and smiled politely at neighbors. Inside, she felt hollowed clean. She could not forget his face in the cabin doorway, half swallowed by shadow, eaten alive by shame. He had told her to leave. But as the wind howled around the farmhouse, something settled in her bones. He had not meant it. He had been trying to spare her from a burden he believed she could not carry. He had been trying to protect her from himself. Clara did not want protection. She wanted him. When the storm finally broke, rain slashing the earth in heavy sheets, she did not retreat indoors. She wrapped herself in a thick wool shawl, lit the lantern, and stepped straight into the downpour. Mud clutched at her boots with every step. The rain was cold and merciless, soaking her through in minutes, plastering her hair to her cheeks. The shawl dragged heavy across her shoulders. Still, she went on. Guided by the trembling glow of the lantern and the fierce, stubborn fire burning in her chest. She followed the muddy trail toward the timberline, fighting the wind, fighting the doubt, fighting for the life she knew was meant to be hers. By the time she reached the cabin, the storm had claimed her completely. She was shaking hard, teeth chattering, but she did not hesitate. She stepped up to the door and knocked, hard enough to cut through the roar of thunder. "Ash, open the door!" Almost at once he appeared, staff in hand, as if he had been standing there waiting for the storm to finish him. He stared at her in stunned disbelief. Water streamed from her shoulders. The lantern hissed and sputtered in the downpour. "What are you doing here?" he rasped, his voice barely carrying over the wind. "You'll freeze out there." She lifted her chin, rain clinging to her lashes, and met his gaze without flinching. "I came because you won't come to me." He swore under his breath and reached for her, trying to pull her beneath the eaves, out of the worst of the rain. But Clara shook her head and stepped back, deeper into the storm. "No." "Ash," she shouted over the wind, "you don't get to shelter me now while you hide in the shadows." His jaw locked, knuckles whitening around the staff. "I told you," he yelled back. "I told you the truth." "You told me lies," she shot back. "You told me you're a burden, that I deserve peace, that I should let go." Thunder rolled overhead. "But rain doesn't lie, Ash, and neither do I." She moved closer, boots sliding in the mud. "I've loved you since before the bluecoat troopers ever rode through, before the war, since the days you mended our fences and carried my father to bed." Her voice did not waver. "And I will keep loving you, whether you limp or walk, whether you sleep through the night or wake up screaming." Ash shook his head. Water ran down his face like tears as his composure splintered. "You don't understand," he cried. "Every time I close my eyes, I see blood. Men dying, children crying. My leg burns like fire, and I can't work the way I used to." His voice broke. "You'd end up nursing me like another sick man. I won't do that to you." Clara's hands trembled, but she did not retreat. She stepped into the weak circle of light spilling from the open door, the lantern flickering between them. "You think I want easy?" she demanded. "You think I'd choose a man with strong legs and an empty heart?" Lightning tore open the sky, lighting the anguish carved into his face. Thunder crashed close enough to shake the ground. "I know what work is, Ash," she said fiercely. "I've been working all my life. Loving you is the only work I choose gladly." She stood unmoving in the chaos, rain lashing her hair around her face, her eyes burning, unyielding as the storm itself. "Look at me," Clara said. "Say you don't love me." She stepped closer, rain cutting across her face. "Ash, say it to my face. Say you don't love me and I'll walk away right now. I won't ever come back." Ash's breath caught hard in his throat. He opened his mouth to say the words that would drive her from him, the words meant to save her. Nothing came. Rain pounded the earth. The lantern hissed and spat. His silence answered for him. He couldn't lie. Not to her. Not now. Clara's tears blended with the storm. "That's what I thought," she whispered. She let the lantern slip from her hand. It hit the mud, the flame dying with a soft breath of smoke, leaving them standing in a gray, storm-lit darkness. She spread her arms wide, shaking, exposed, but unmoving. "I'm not leaving," she said. "If it takes all night, I'll stay right here until you see what's true." Ash's chest rose and fell violently. For a long, terrible moment, he fought it. The shame, the fear, the broken belief that he was no longer enough. Then, with a ragged sound torn from his chest, he let go. The staff slipped from his grasp and clattered across the porch, forgotten. He stumbled forward into the rain and crushed her against him, holding her with a desperation that bordered on violence. Water soaked them both in seconds. He didn't care. His arms locked around her, his face pressed into her rain-soaked hair. He shook against her, not from the cold, but from the flood he could no longer contain. "Clara," he whispered, his voice breaking against her neck. "I'm so tired of running, so tired of being half a man." He swallowed hard. "You're the only thing that makes me whole." She clung to him, heart hammering against his ribs. "Then stop running," she sobbed. "Be here. Be with me." He pulled back just enough to see her face, water streaming down her cheeks, her eyes steady, her mouth trembling with love and fury, both. He touched her cheek with shaking fingers, as if afraid she might vanish. "I don't deserve you," he said softly. "Maybe not," she answered, a small, tear-bright smile touching her lips. "But love doesn't wait for what's deserved. It chooses." For the first time in years, Ash allowed himself to smile, crooked, scarred, real. "Broken," he murmured, "but still standing." He kissed her then. Rain and tears mingled on their lips as the storm roared around them like a wild blessing. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was years of fear and longing tearing free, spilling out into the night. When they finally broke apart, the storm was still raging, but neither of them felt it anymore. Their foreheads rested together as the rain softened, settling into a steady, patient rhythm. Ash bent and retrieved his staff, but he did not release her hand. "Come inside," he murmured. "You'll catch a chill." Clara let out a small laugh, thin with relief. "Only if you promise not to make me stand out here again." Together, they stepped into the cabin and shut the door against the storm. Inside, the fire still burned, casting warm, restless shadows across the walls. For the first time since his return, the small, rough space felt like more than shelter. It felt like a home. Ash lowered himself onto the bench, his leg throbbing from the effort. When Clara knelt to tug off her soaked boots, he reached for her hand and held it gently. His thumb traced the calluses on her palm, quiet proof of all the labor she had carried while he was gone. "I can't promise I won't stumble," he said softly, eyes fixed on the flames. "I can't promise the nightmares will leave." Clara squeezed his hand, her warmth seeping into him. "Then we stumble together," she said, "and we fight them together." The fire cracked. Outside, the storm drifted east across the mesa, leaving only the soft tapping of rain on the roof. In that rhythm, Ash felt something he thought had vanished forever, peace enough to breathe, and hope enough to stay. Morning came clear after the storm. The sky stood scrubbed blue, the mesa sparkling with rain. For the first time in years, Ash woke not to the echo of rifle fire or the hollow silence of isolation, but to the warmth of another person's breath. They began their new life quietly. Clara moved her belongings into the cabin at the timberline. Baskets of food, her mother's quilts, jars of preserves lined carefully along the shelf. At first, Ash struggled. His legs slowed him, and working the rocky ground left him breathless. At times, shame darkened his face. Clara never scolded. She would simply kneel beside him, place her hand over his, and remind him, "We don't need perfection, Ash. We need presence. That's enough." And slowly, it became enough. Ash discovered that while his body had limits, his knowledge remained whole. He began teaching the local boys how to set snares, how to read deer tracks in dry soil, how to listen to the wind before a storm. At first, they kept their distance, half wary of him, but curiosity outpaced fear. By autumn, they sought him out, calling him Mr. Ash with shy respect. The true turning point came one afternoon, when a neighbor's child tumbled into an old well behind the Peterson place. Panic swept through the yard as voices rose in alarm. Ash shoved his staff aside, bracing his good leg against the stones. With Clara steadying him, he lowered himself partway into the dark shaft. He hauled the boy up, coughing, shaken, but alive. The bitter mesa folk, who once whispered about that Apache at the timberline, stood frozen in silence. Then, one by one, hats were lifted. Soft words of thanks moved through the crowd like a tide. It did not change everything at once, but something had turned. Ash was no longer a shadow among the trees. He was a neighbor. When spring finally reached Bitter Mesa, it washed the land in color. Blue lupine spilled across the ridges, and the creek where they had once parted shimmered with new life. It was there, beneath the cottonwoods, that Ash and Clara chose to marry. They wanted nothing grand, only truth. Clara wore a simple white dress her mother had sewn years earlier, and in her hair, polished until it caught the sun, rested the jade comb. When Ash saw it, his breath faltered. All the years of sorrow seemed to bend toward that moment, what had once been a token of farewell now standing as a promise fulfilled. Their vows were plain, spoken with voices rough from feeling. "I take you as my wife," Ash said, holding her hands tightly, "to walk with me on the roads I can still walk, and to stand with me where I must stand still." Clara's eyes filled. "And I take you as my husband, to share work, sorrow, laughter, and rest until the Lord calls us home." When they kissed, the crowd cheered. The creek's song rose louder, bearing witness to a homecoming earned mile by hard mile. The years turned like a wheel. The cabin at the timberline grew into a home filled with children's laughter. Nightmares still came to Ash at times, but with Clara beside him, the dark no longer ruled him. When their first daughter was born, Clara laid the jade comb beside the infant in her cradle. "One day," she whispered, "this will be yours. It carries the memory of how love waits and endures." Ash touched the comb, then the child's small hand. "No," he said softly, a smile easing across his scarred face. "It carries the memory of how love brings us home." One evening, long after the wedding and long after the first harvests, Ash sat on the porch with Clara as twilight settled over the land. His leg ached, but it no longer defined him. Ash looked at his wife, still steady, still bright, just as she had been the night she stood unflinching in the rain. He closed his hand around hers, feeling the familiar strength there. Crickets sang their evening hymn. From the yard came the drifting voices of their children, laughter rising and falling like a tide. The mesa lay quiet around them, holding the sound, holding the moment. And at last, Ash understood. Love was never the absence of storms. It was the shelter found inside them. The years had tested them both, through loss, through doubt, through wounds that never fully healed. Yet what endured was not perfection, but presence. Not ease, but choice. Clara's stubborn heart had refused to let go. Ash's long road had carried him from shame into belonging. Together, they had carved a life that stood not because it was untouched, but because it had been fought for. The mesa had seen it all, the goodbyes, the waiting, the return. And now it bore witness to something quieter and stronger than anything that had come before. A home built not on promises made lightly, but on love that stayed. As night settled in, Ash rested back, listening to the land breathe. His leg still ached. The past still lived in him, but neither ruled him anymore. He squeezed Clara's hand once more, and in that simple motion, the long journey finally came to rest. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for being here and letting this story live within your heart. If it moved you, I hope you'll walk beside us through more journeys of the Wild West. Stories filled with truth, endurance, and grace. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay close. Together we'll keep riding across these wide-open lands of memory and hope. Thank you. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Our narratives bring inspiration from the past, recreated with fictional and dramatized interpretations for entertainment purposes only. AI tools serve as creative support, but the storytelling, editing, and emotional refinement are handled by our team to guarantee authenticity. We comply with content policies for AI use, avoiding impersonations, identity fabrication, or historically misleading images. All visual and audio content is legally sourced. Redistribution or modification requires prior written approval. Thank you for honoring creativity, collaboration, and storytelling done with heart.